My name is Sam Jacobson. I am an orthopedic and a women's health physical therapist, and I specialize in endurance athletes, but particularly female athletes. The clinic I work at is in New York City, and it is a physical therapy space that specializes in all sorts of running or endurance events, but with a special focus on the New York City running community. A lot of my patients that I had originally were women who were maybe they were single and running and like now they are then I've kind of watched them like get pregnant now or postpartum and kind of working through their life, which has been really, really fun.
A lot of the women I work with are either current or former athletes, and so many of the former athletes that I coach one-on-one do either marathons or some sort of endurance training or CrossFit. I feel like it's so
Mm-hmm.
interesting, like how often it comes up. And so I guess like what from your perspective, working with so many female athletes, like what is your like why as to these, this being a hobby that they get into?
There is really no barrier to entry, right? So and with that, there's depending on the sport you played, maybe at a college or even a high school level, running was probably a component of the sport. So there is
Mm,
like a familiarity to it. Or you were an athlete in high school or in college that, or even after that, that used running as like a complement to that sport. So you know what it is. It's not like you were a soccer player and you're like signing up for a softball team and you have to relearn this whole sport.
yeah.
Um, so I think that is probably the biggest thing, and it's a very low equipment, low cost sport. And then I think the other reason why people or athletes find running maybe later in life is because most athletes have that like intuitive drive to like set goals and then work towards them, which running does allow. Um, and then also just like self competition, right? It's something that you can see the progression that you're making over weeks or months, and there's really not too much like ambiguity to it, right?
Mhm.
You see when you're getting faster, or you see that you used to be able to run a 10K and now you're being able to run a half marathon and so on.
How do you sort of, with former athletes in particular, help them prevent injuries or sort of like overtraining?
As a coach, the number one thing that I mostly tell athletes, and specifically female athletes who used to be say a collegiate athlete or something, is that my main goal is to just save them from themselves.
Mm.
They are used to a certain level of commitment to the sport or like level of intensity to the sport. And a lot of times that translates to running. And most people are just doing way too much, way too soon.
Mm.
Also, with running, there is such a balance between like not all of your runs are going to be at above that 80% intensity, right? Like few of them will be, to be honest. But if you were an athlete, every time you went to practice or every time you went to a game, you were expected to perform at like your highest level.
Right.
So it's kind of just pulling them back a little bit and then just being like, hey, this is the plan or the structure that we need you to follow, and you don't need to do more than this right now.
How do you show them the value of like, you know, taking it easier than maybe they're used to?
Um, I usually urge them to, regardless of whether they have a race or something coming up, I usually really try to push them to set like some sort of goal,
Hmm.
whether it is just like we're gonna hit this distance without having any injuries, or um, we're going to like be able to do a workout at this pace, and then just allowing them to like settle into the first couple of weeks of training and then achieve said goal.
Yeah.
Um, and then usually the buy-in is just with how good they feel on those higher intensity days or races, even though they haven't been doing that intensity all along. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like convincing themselves that they can achieve what they want to achieve without doing that specific thing all the time.
Totally. And I love that you bring in the like feeling aspect of like, yeah, how do you feel? What is like,
Mm-hmm.
how are you like, does your body feel? Are you hurting? Are you like, able to recover quickly or, whatever your sort of like
Yeah.
guidelines are? I love that.
Running is also really cool because if you're getting into long distance running and your goal is eventually a half marathon or a marathon, the marathon say is obviously the goal, and you know that you're eventually going to run 26.2 miles. But if you weren't like a true runner all along, every during the training there is going to be a point in that where like every week is the longest you've ever run in your entire life.
Mm.
Right. So say you've only done a half marathon and now we're slowly working up to a marathon, you run 16 miles and like that's a huge accomplishment. You've never run 16 miles before. And then the next week you do 17 and 18, right? So that also is a really, really cool part of the whole process.
Yeah, I love that. Right. And just like reminding them that like you just did something you've never done before.
Yeah. Yeah. And you feel good after.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love that. Okay, I know we talked a little bit about running clubs before, but this was the last question I had. So we'll see like if we covered it earlier, if you have anything else to add. But what is sort of the allure or like your experience with like camaraderie and running clubs?
I think it all comes down to the community, right? Because you're not, it is a team, very much so, but it's different than your, like the classic team that the athlete probably grew up on, right? Because you're not all working towards a shared goal, right? You're all working towards your own goal together. And you have all these people to work on your goal with, right? But at the end of the day, like my race is my race, their race is their race. So I think it's just the community and the relatability of all of these people know exactly what you're going through, and your life is going to change a little bit. Maybe when you set this like really big running goal that feels really scary and you're going to have to adjust some things, and all of these people on the team understand that, right? So they're going to understand that you're tired all the time, you're hungry all the time, right? And maybe you don't want to do like this, all of these social, like your life has to change a little bit
Totally.
as you're going through this. And it's just people who understand it.
So is there any advice you would give to a former athlete who is interested in running or, running marathons, more endurance, longer distances? Any advice you'd give them?
This sounds like a self plug, and I don't mean it to be like that, but I really do think that if you are a former athlete and you're trying to get into running, you really should work with someone to help you get there. Because again, going back to that principle of doing a little bit too much, building that base and like having someone guide you through that, I think will really take a lot of the frustration of constantly feeling injured when you're starting. There are also a ton of online resources that you can, like, there are training plans that have been created for beginner, intermediate, advanced runners. And that's where I think needing to put egos aside and just like, if you're getting into running for the first time, like start on the beginner plan just so that you know that that progression is going to be very gradual.
Yeah.
Even if maybe your paces line up with more of an advanced runner, like come back down a little bit and really allow for that slow build and then go from there. And what I always tell people, if you have any interest in running, you can do it. But two, if you are someone who like you go for a run and you have like any joy from running, like any at all, then you could train for a half or a full marathon. You really just have to like it just a little bit.
Yeah.
To kind of grow into it.